Imagine for a moment that you could trade your home for a single flower. It seems absurd, doesn't it? Well, in 1637, in prosperous Holland, this transaction was not only possible, but happened every day. A Dutch catalog from the time listed a tulip called Viceroy for 3,000 to 4,000 guilders. To give you an idea, this was the equivalent of 10 years of work by a skilled craftsman. 10 years of sweat and dedication for a single flower. How did we get to this point? How did an entire society lose its mind to colorful petals? And more importantly, why does this story keep repeating itself today, only with a different guise? 17th century Holland was a true economic paradise. Imagine a small country that dominated global trade. It was as if it were the global powerhouse of the time, with the highest per capita income in the known world. The streets of Amsterdam bustled with merchants of all nationalities, trading spices from the Indies, silk from China, gold from the Americas. In this environment of prosperity and financial sophistication, something extraordinary was about to happen. Tulips had arrived from the distant Ottoman Empire in the mid-16th century, bringing with them an irresistible exotic charm. They were flowers completely unlike anything Europeans had known until then. Initially, they were merely botanical curiosities, unusual flowers to adorn the gardens of the elite. But there was something special about them. Their vibrant colors and elegant shapes quickly won the hearts of Dutch high society. Soon, having tulips in the garden became a symbol of refinement and good taste. And then, something fascinating happened. A virus began infecting some tulips, creating white streaks and flames on the petals. What was supposed to be a disease became the era's greatest symbol of beauty and exclusivity. As if nature itself had created unique and unrepeatable works of art. The Semper Augustus tulip, with its white petals streaked with blood red, became the holy grail of collectors. Owning one meant belonging to a club even more exclusive than the nobility itself. It was the equivalent of having a Da Vinci masterpiece in your home, but with the added bonus of blooming every spring. Prices began to rise gradually but steadily. By 1623, thousands of guilders were being paid for a single rare bulb. To put this into context, a comfortable house in Amsterdam cost around 2,000 guilders. Carriage, complete with horses, it cost 300 guilders. A year's supply of beer for an entire family cost no more than 50 guilders. But what began as an elite hobby soon transformed into something much bigger. Demand grew exponentially, and with it, prices. It was like watching a snowball roll down a mountain, gaining speed and size with every passing meter. With each passing week, more people entered the market, drawn by stories of get rich quick. Between 1634 and 1636, the unthinkable happened. The tulip market exploded. It was no longer just the wealthy buying flowers for their gardens. It was an entire society plunging headfirst into a seemingly endless golden rush. Butchers quit there. Businesses, shoemakers, sold their tools. Even bakers bet their ovens on the next big tulip. This is where the story gets truly surreal. Bulbs began to be bought and sold multiple times before they even sprouted from the ground. Imagine trading something that doesn't even physically exist yet. It was like selling the idea of a tulip, the promise of a future flower. Then came the wind handle movement, literally wind business. In crowded taverns, chalkboards on the walls recorded feverish bids for tulips that hadn't even been planted yet. It was a primitive futures market, but it worked perfectly. Speculators created a sophisticated system of contracts, deposits, and guarantees. People from all walks of life joined in. Craftsmen sold their tools, merchants liquidated their inventories, entire families bet their savings on a single flower. The logic was simple. Prices were only going up, so why not participate? It was like borrowing money from the future. During the winter of 1636 to 1637, prices reached staggering levels. A single bulb of the coveted Semper Augustus reached 6,000 guilders. To put it in perspective, that would buy a mansion in one of Amsterdam's finest neighborhoods, including furniture, horses, and servants for a whole year. Even more impressive, even common tulips soared in price. Varieties that once cost a few pennies were now worth hundreds of guilders. It was as if the market had lost all connection with reality. The euphoria was so great that people traded houses. land and entire herds of cattle for the promise of flowers. What made all this possible was a perfect psychological feedback system. Each successful sale validated the belief that prices would continue to rise. Each new investor who entered the market brought in more money, further inflating prices. It was a vicious cycle disguised as a virtuous one. People developed their own language for this market. They spoke of wedding tulips, bulbs so valuable they would secure the future of an entire family. The figure of the tulip broker emerged, specialized intermediaries who moved between buyers and sellers as if they were diplomats from a flowery kingdom. The most fascinating thing is that many of the participants knew, deep down, that it couldn't last forever. But the temptation of easy profits was stronger than reason. It was like participating in a dance where everyone knew the music would stop, but no one wanted to be the first to leave the dance floor. But as every party has its end, Tulip Mania also had its end, and when it arrived, it was devastating. February 1637 marked the beginning of the end of this collective madness. The winter that year was particularly harsh, and perhaps this helped people begin to think more clearly. It is said that it all began at a morning auction in Haarlem. The auctioneers were expecting the usual buyers, but this time, something different happened. No one showed up. Simply no one was willing to pay the exorbitant prices. It was as if a collective magic had been broken overnight. Panic set in. Merchants who were millionaires on paper discovered their contracts weren't even worth the paper they were written on. Tulips, which days before had been more valuable than gold, became flowers again. The transformation was so rapid that many couldn't even process what had happened. Charles Mackay would later describe it with surgical precision. Prosperous merchants were reduced to beggary. The speed of the fall was as stunning as the rise. As families who had built fortunes in flowers found themselves in poverty overnight. The Dutch courts, in a wise decision, declared that contracts signed during the mania were gambling debts without legal validity. This prevented a chain of lawsuits, but left thousands of people in desperate straits. Sellers were left with worthless bulbs, buyers lost their deposits. Interestingly, despite the catastrophic individual losses, the Dutch economy as a whole did not suffer a profound shock. The country remained prosperous for decades. It was as if tulip mania had been a collective dream that didn't affect structural reality. But culturally, the impact was lasting. Satires and paintings of the time mocked tulip madness. The episode went down in history as a warning about the dangers of unbridled greed. Dutch society developed a healthy distrust of get-rich-quick schemes. Tulip mania became the prototype for all speculative bubbles that followed. In 1720, the South Sea bubble repeated the same pattern in England. In 1929, Wall Street collapsed following the same logic. 2000, dot-coms followed the same path. Each generation seems doomed to rediscover the same lesson. The pattern is always the same: a new and promising asset, consistently rising prices, a massive influx of speculators, complete disconnect from reality, and finally, a sudden awakening. It's like a symphony played by different instruments, but always with the same score. Today, when we look at cryptocurrencies, NFTs, or any other asset that promises quick wealth, the same psychological mechanisms are at work. Human nature hasn't changed in 4 centuries. Technology has evolved. Markets have become more sophisticated, but basic emotions remain unchanged. Greed continues to blind people to obvious risks. The fear of missing out still drives masses of people to make irrational decisions, and the illusion that this time is different remains stronger than ever. It's as if each generation has to learn the same lesson on its own. Let's return to that initial question. How can an entire society lose its mind over colorful petals? The answer is both simpler and more complex than we imagine. It is simple because the mechanisms are always the same. Hope turned into greed. Greed fueled by early success. Success creating the illusion that the rules have changed. It is complex because it involves the deepest layers of the human psyche. The desire to belong, the fear of being left out, the need to believe that we can transcend the limitations of ordinary life through a miraculous investment. These are primal forces that no financial education can ever fully tame. The tulips of 1637 were no different from the internet stocks of 2000 or the cryptocurrencies of today. What changes is only the packaging. The content remains eternally the same. In every era, we find a new tulip to worship, a new altar on which to sacrifice our rationality. Today, when you hear about the next revolutionary investment that will change everything, remember the Semper Augustus tulip. Remember how one flower managed to be worth more than a house, more than years of work, more than common sense? Remember? That history is full of Semper Augustus in disguise. Tulip mania teaches us that there is no such thing as a free lunch. That assets whose only value is the hope of reselling them for more money rarely hold that promise in the long run. That markets can remain irrational longer than we can remain solvent. But perhaps the most important lesson lies elsewhere. Perhaps it is the recognition that we are all vulnerable to these collective illusions, that individual rationality can easily be overwhelmed by the madness of crowds, that even the most intelligent among us can be seduced by the next tulip that comes along. So, the next time you see everyone chasing the same miraculous investment, take a deep breath. Remember that, in the end, a tulip is just a tulip. And a house will always be more useful than a flower, no matter how beautiful. The difference between 1637 and today is in human nature, which remains unchanged. It's simply the name of what we choose to use to fuel our dreams of easy wealth. But the ending remains surprisingly predictable.